Welcome to The Resilient Leader. Today's session is all about the mindset we need to navigate uncertainty, maintain composure, and make decisions under pressure. So let's say you're planning for a long road trip. Maybe it's a couple of hours, maybe it's a couple of days. I don't think I could do a multi-day road trip, but hey, listen, you've got a plan, you're packed, you have everything you need for when you're on the road. Mentally, you're ready for what you know is going to be a long slog, if you will. At least that's what I'd call it. And then, as they say, the best laid plans. It could be several hours, or it might be just after you hit the road, but the weather turns, traffic crawls to a stop. You left your cell phone charger in the bag that's in your trunk. It's not that you don't have a charger, it's just you don't have one where you need it, when you need it. When you're in it for the long haul, especially as leaders in organizations where change can come quickly, where there's swirling uncertainty, when things go from fine to not fine, this is where resilience comes in. Resilience isn't about toughing it out or staying strong or any of those, buck it up type ideas. It's about being able to navigate and handle all of those different things that are going to happen on that long drive, emotionally, physically, tactically, psychologically. Everything is great when everything is great. When things don't go as planned, are you still able to make it through that not so perfect, really long road trip? When the unexpected happens, can you make it through that intact? That requires resilience. And resilience isn't a specific thing. It's the ability to do all of those things, be all of those things in real time, sometimes for long periods of time in shifting conditions and situations, all while staying level-headed, focused, and steady. Sure, there's some degree of toughness involved, but it's also patience, tolerance, endurance, grace, understanding. It's all of those things taken as a whole. That's what we're talking about today. So I'm Jana Etienne. I'm a CPA, or as I like to say, a recovering CPA. After more than 26 years in public accounting, I now work as a consultant, trainer, and speaker. My work is focused on helping organizations develop human-centered leaders who can create trusting environments, foster collaboration, and build high-performing teams. Change management strategies are important, but they only work when the people leading the change have the capacity to lead with clarity, empathy, and, wait for it, resilience. Because change is hard, and it's not because of the process. You can have a great strategy. It's because of the people. It's human nature to resist uncertainty, to hold on to what's familiar, and to struggle when things feel unclear. And the heart of my work is developing programs that strengthen those internal leadership skills to create and support that organizational change from the inside out. At the end of the day, my passion is helping professionals build deeper connections, cultivate safety, and thrive as inclusive, mindful, and trusted leaders. This is the Ascend Leadership Framework, something I created to reflect the kind of leadership that's grounded in, real people, real pressure, real complexity. For me, human-centered leadership means, oh, sorry, I think I moved my slide. Well, now you get a preview, right? Human-centered leadership isn't just a role or a title, it's impact. It's how we show up and influence others. Most leadership programs break things into separate buckets, communication, emotional intelligence, time management, etc. Those are all important, but they don't exist in isolation. So the Ascend model, I created it to reflect the complexity of humanity, our humanity in leadership, because in reality, those different competencies all oversect. Overlap and intersect. Oversect. I just made up a new word. I do that all the time. So today, what we're focusing on when we talk about resilience, I'm going to zoom in really on 3 different ideas that all kind of come together that are at the heart of resilience. So self-leadership is doing the inner work. So that's cultivating awareness, managing your energy, leading yourself with intention. It's navigation. That's about adapting in the moment, responding to uncertainty without losing yourself or your sense of direction. And then decisive action. This is about moving forward and not in ways that are reactive. It's that U-turn on that long road trip, if you will. being able to move forward with clarity, courage, and grounded in purpose. And so these are the themes that are woven through today's session. I do want to take a quick look at the Q&A because I'll be trying my best to keep an eye on it. I would encourage you to drop your thoughts in there. If you're dropping in a thought about a particular topic, do me a favor and say what the topic is, because I might not see your comment for another minute or so. And sometimes I see them and I'm not sure what I was saying when you drop that comment in. And questions as well. I love taking questions as we go. So if you've ever sat in one of my sessions, you know I like to start with the definition. I think definitions are important because they give us a shared language. They can help us ground that conversation, give clarity to what we're talking about. And when we're really looking at something as layered and as nuanced and complex as personal resilience, understanding the terms matter. And I mean, look at the page here. There are, I should have numbered them clearly. There are 4 different definitions or ways that the word resilience is defined. There are actually more than 4, but I liked these 4 because what I like about them is that they each touch on a different dimension of resilience, whether it's physical, emotional, cognitive. These are all the dimensions I was talking about needing for that long road trip. So you've got the ability to recover quickly, which speaks to mental and emotional recovery after a setback. That's often the piece we think about when you hear people talking about leadership development, right? But you also have elasticity. So this is the idea that you can stretch and be compressed, but still retain or return to form, if you will. It's about adaptability. That's, being rerouted. That's those U-turns on the road trip, taking it in stride because you're going to get there eventually. There's the idea of springing back. That's rebounding from the challenge and the stress, which shows up in the way we regain momentum after those tough spells, after we make that really difficult decision, that hard decision, and then being able to bounce back and move forward. And then there's the last one here, the mental and emotional piece. This might be recovering from illness, a personal hardship. That speaks to our humanity, that resilience is not always about being strong. Sometimes it's about being honest and giving ourselves the space to reset. Self-compassion and grace is something that many of us, I'll speak for myself, aren't as good at as we could be. And this is so important to have that in terms of resilience. So remember I said taken as a whole a moment ago? That's what this definition reflects. It's how we navigate difficulty, how we adapt under pressure, and how we move forward with intention. Now, I used the term toughen up or buck up earlier. That's what we think about when we think about resilience. We confuse it with being tough. But real resilience isn't about being unaffected. It's about being intentional in how we respond, especially when we are affected, if you will. So this isn't pretending we're fine, pushing through it all at all costs. It's about being aware of what's happening, staying connected to our values, and choosing to move forward from that place of clarity. You don't have to bounce back overnight. You bounce back on your terms, in your time, in ways that are aligned with who you are, while maintaining the trust of your team. That's what today is about, challenging the assumptions we may hold about what resilience is supposed to look like. Oh, because suppose and should are very dangerous words, right? So instead of building something more grounded, more honest, and more sustainable, that's what we want to think about instead when we're challenging those assumptions. You can see here, resilience isn't hiding or pretending to go it alone. It's grace under pressure. It's managing our emotions and knowing when to say, I'm not sure. I don't know, but I'm working on it. Or, asking for help. All of this without losing ourselves in the process. Now, I want you to think about those instructions you get when you get on the airplane. The flight attendant reminds us all that if the oxygen mask drops, put yours on first before you can help others. And it sounds simple, maybe even obvious, but it goes against how many of us are wired. And I have to say, whenever I hear that after I board a flight, I think to myself, how hard that will be when you know others around you need help. And this is especially true if you think about it from the leadership perspective. We are focused on supporting other people, holding things together, pushing through. We are responsible for the organization or for the team or for the project. Here's the thing though, if you are struggling to breathe, like they say on the airplane, so metaphorically speaking here, you can't be present for anyone else. You can't lead effectively. You can't think clearly. You can't connect with your team in meaningful ways. And as leaders, we are always on stage. You will hear me say that over and again whenever we're talking about leadership, because people look to leaders for cues and signals on how things are going. In good times, yay, we are on track. We're doing well. And in times of uncertainty, we're fine. We're working it out. We'll figure it out. You're safe. People are looking to leaders to set that tone. And if leadership panics, if they hesitate, if it seems like you as a leader are cracking under pressure, you are disconnecting or disengaging, organizational uncertainty can lead to organizational anxiety, which can escalate into organizational chaos. So resilience, this matters because leadership just isn't about how much you can carry. It's about how you carry it, whether you can keep showing up in a way that others are expecting from you, what they need from you as a leader. You've heard this, I've said this before in other webinars and self-care programs and wellness programs. Taking care of yourself isn't selfish. When you tend to your capacity, that's how you create space to show up with presence, steadiness, and intention. This is especially when you are under the pressure to make some really difficult decisions or navigate some really uncertain times. What happens when you're not grounded? When you're depleted, overwhelmed, or stretched thin, we can become reactive. We can be short with people. We lose patience. We lose clarity. Sometimes we are moving fast just so that we can feel like we're moving, but not because we are necessarily headed in the right direction or because we're making thoughtful decisions. And even if we don't mean to, we can come across as checked out, inconsistent, or unapproachable. You know, a moment ago when I was saying we appear to be detached or disengaging, when that happens, trust erodes. People don't feel steady around you. They don't feel safe in the organization. They second guess what leadership is saying. They don't even know if leadership is listening. When leaders can stay composed, even when the answer isn't clear, or they're still working to figure it out, how they show up in those moments of uncertainty, or when they're working through that decision-making process, are they projecting calm? Despite the feelings inside, are you able to maintain your composure? Because if so, people are going to trust the process. They might not understand where we're going. They might not even know what the plan is, but they trust the leader and that the leader will keep it together. Composure, resilience, that the leader will get them there and everything will work out in due time. The cost of not tending to our own resilience isn't just how it impacts us. It impacts all the people around us, as well as the culture that we are creating. So my husband and I were having an interesting discussion over the weekend. I won't share the personal details, of course, but here's the way to frame it. We were talking about intrusive thoughts and how hard it can be to shut them off, especially when we're feeling uncomfortable. So let's say you had a bad day, you were surprised by something someone said. You're looking back at how you did something, maybe handled a meeting, and you're second guessing yourself, right? All of that negative chatter is starting to show up. So it's the next day, you're having coffee with a friend. It's later that night, you're watching a soccer game. You are minding your own business when out of the blue, those negative thoughts start to pop back into your head. How you should have handled it. You start to think about all those horrible things that you just know the other person might be thinking of you. Those thoughts are like earworms. You can't seem to turn them off. Even when you put them out of your mind or you're trying to, they keep spinning around. These thoughts burn energy units. and you only have so many energy units in a day. And burning energy on intrusive thoughts leaves you with less energy for everything else. So when you're stressed, drained, bored, distracted, feeling powerless, impatient, those intrusive thoughts, think of them as processes happening in the background in your mind, and they're signals for what's happening in your body beneath the surface. So here's the thing. This is what my husband and I's conversation got me thinking of. So let me show you this. This is called the Taskmaster, and many of you might be familiar with this. It's a little pop-up in your computer, and this is the actual processes view, and it shows you a list of all running applications in the background in real time. At any given time, there are a lot of processes running in the background of our brains. Some of them are essential. Some of them are just draining resources. You know, that negative chatter that I was talking about a moment ago. These background processes aren't necessarily bad. Some of them are who we are. It's how we function. Think Windows or Mac OS. Some of them, when we don't check in on what's happening, we might lose control over what influences are showing up. You know, those negative, those earworms, if you will. So think virus, right? Malware in the context of a computer. Now, this is the other view. This is the performance view of the Taskmaster. And what this one shows is real-time usage. Think again about those energy units. So this tells us what processes are burning how much energy. Can you imagine if we could get a performance view of our brain? It would show us how many energy units our system is using and how hard our brain is working to keep everything running, even if it looks like there's nothing wrong under the surface. I couldn't remember if it was a duck or a swan, you know, the one that's calmly gliding across the water, but its feet are paddling furiously under the water. It doesn't matter if it's a duck or a swan, you get it. As a leader, everything looks fine on the inside, but there's a whole lot going on in the background. And the challenge here is if we're stretched thin or moving too fast, we don't necessarily know what all of those processes are. And things like mental load, second guessing, you know, all the things that I put over here on the side of the slide, they might still be open in the background and still pulling energy, even if we're not actively paying attention to them. And this is what it might look like when our systems start to max out. You might still be functioning on the outside, but everything is slower on the inside. It's heavier or more reactive. That can start to wear us down over time and chip away at our resilience. You know what I talked about earlier. It's some of it is tolerance, some of it is endurance, some of it is patience, some of it is grace. Well, all of that can start to be worn down over time to the point where we start doing those things, disengage, disconnect, get short, impatient, those kind of things. Now, this is what I call flying on autopilot. It's all of this stuff is just happening and we're not paying attention to it, even when what's happening is undermining our performance. And interrupting autopilot starts with awareness, simply put. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but all of these words in the background that I had scrolling here on the screen, I purposely used a really light color font because in reality, that's what it is. It's there, it's subtle. And if we can sort of shake it off and develop that awareness, maybe we can start to actually see these almost as if they're scrolling back in our minds. Okay, maybe I have an overactive imagination, but that's what I was thinking about this Sunday, when my husband and I were chatting. So how do you notice that? How do you build that awareness on what's pulling on you, what might need to be paused? And I'm not saying we need to pause everything forever, but sometimes we need to pause just enough to make the space we need to be able to lead with intention. And not everything needs to be shut down. But often we keep things running out of habit, out of fear or pressure. Those shoulds that I was talking about, those old patterns that aren't serving us, they're running and they're taking up space. So once you're aware of what's running, the next question is, what can I close? What can I pause? What can I do to clear that space? So I put these questions on the slide here as an invitation to how might you do that? For example, you can ask, what's the energy that I'm using that I don't need to be using? What am I carrying that I didn't even realize was still open? If I could quiet some internal noise or calm some reactivity, what would this open up in terms of capacity for me? This isn't about being more efficient. It's about being more available to yourself, to others, to the work that actually matters. When we intentionally close what we don't need, we make room for that clarity and for that focus. Remember that definition of resilience that talked about being able to stretch or compress under pressure and bounce back? That's what we're talking about when we talk about understanding what those underlying pressures are, because some of those background processes are creating that stretch, and some of those background processes are causing that sensation of compression. And resilience isn't about never stretching and never being compressed. It's about being able to flex and come back to, I'll say steady, if that's the best word, because there's no such thing as perfect, right? We can only come back to our intention and how we want to show up, how we want to lead, and how we want others to experience us as leaders and as colleagues. It goes so far as to say as friends and as spouses and as neighbors, how we want to show up requires us to be aware of what's happening in the moment, which might be undermining those fantastic intentions that we have. Now, this session has been grounded in the idea that leadership starts from within. Resilience is part of that inner foundation. Okay, so it's what helps us stay present when things are hard. The stretch and compress. I don't know why I'm leaning into that one, but it's what helps us move with intention when we don't feel like we're in control, that feeling of being worn down. And the question is often, great, so this is what I'm supposed to have. How do I get it? And think about that long road trip when we're getting, it's coming to the end. So I live in Maryland. Let's imagine I'm driving to Chicago. I don't know how long it is, but that's a long drive in my mind. And we're almost there. We have a few hours to go. I'm getting really uncomfortable. Maybe I'm hungry. Maybe I have to go to the bathroom. Maybe my phone is dying because my charger, right? Here's the thing. Let's say we're going to a wedding. It's a big event. We have to not only make it, we have to make it on time. And we want to make sure that along the way, we don't lose enthusiasm or energy or excitement for the big event. And so, great, I can think about just making it to the destination, but what does it cost me along the way? So leading from within is really about thinking about what that cost is going to be and what can I do to not have it cost me to the point that I kind of show up and I'm ready to just go, but I'm not necessarily ready to celebrate and enjoy. Now, does that mean get it is what we should be thinking about in terms of resilience? And I don't think that's the right question. So what about build it? Is building resilience what we're trying to do here? And build as a word sometimes feels like to build something, you're starting from scratch, right? You're starting from ground zero. And I don't think we're starting from scratch when it comes to resilience. That's not how I see it. So yeah, I'm playing on words here just a little bit. I'm splitting hairs to make a point because the word that feels right to me is strengthen. And you remember I was talking about all of those different definitions or the importance of different definitions. Well, words matter in a lot of the conversations we're having about what does it mean to be a good leader? What does leadership look like? What does it entail? Words are especially important to understand and differentiate so that we can think about subtleties and layers of meaning that shape how we think. Because resilience isn't something you go out and get. It's not something we're building from scratch. I think it's something we already have. Then really the question is, how do we recognize it, reconnect with it, and practice it in real time? Think of resilience as a muscle. Like, I was doing this yesterday when I was practicing. I kept touching my muscle. And it got me thinking about the fact that only exercise, diligence, and ongoing practice, that's how we strengthen muscle. That's how we strengthen resilience. So there are 4 steps, in case you hadn't guessed. I got 1, 2, 3, 4 here, right? There are 4 steps. And this isn't the theory part. This is actual things you can, and patterns you can try to start noticing and paying attention to. So the first one is pause to notice. And this sounds simple, but it's the hardest thing to do when you're overwhelmed, when you're feeling triggered, right? Most of us are just used to, we're trained in this industry, in the accounting profession, and we're very analytical, you know, we're very rational, we're process oriented. So we want to push through, we just want to stay productive. But resilience starts with awareness. What am I feeling? What's going on? And pausing doesn't mean stopping. It just is creating enough space to open up that capacity. I've used that word capacity a lot. That's what we're seeking to constantly maintain. So the next step is to reframe. And so this means we don't pretend everything's okay. It's being honest about the situation and choosing how to see it. You know, it could be the difference between this is happening to me versus this is something I'm navigating, or from I failed to I'm learning something important here. I mentioned I had 26 years of practice in public accounting. 17 years of them were in my own firm. And I remember one busy season in particular. It was the year after, well, the first busy season after I had transitioned to an entirely new software ecosystem. In this ecosystem, there was software for managing your file cabinet, time and billing, tax preparation, tax planning, because I was a tax person, right? That busy season was hard. And let me tell you, there were days when I was saying things like, oh, I have made a terrible mistake. What was I thinking? I'm such a bad leader. Like I was thinking all of these things. And I was thinking, I can't do this. Remember that saying, if you think you can't, you're right, or something like that? Well, eventually I had to shift my thinking. I had to reframe. And so I reframed to, I don't like this, but I'm doing it, right? And that one reframe changed everything. Yes, it was going to be hard, but I was going to get through it. And I actually felt better after that, more grounded, more capable, more clear. And it didn't necessarily get easier. What it felt like was less hard. And I was able to keep that April 15th finish line in my view. The third step is protecting your energy. I was talking about energy units earlier. And protecting your energy is about what are those processes that are open. This is really about boundaries, recognizing that energy is not unlimited. Remember, you only have so many units. So what else isn't unlimited? Your time, your attention, your emotional bandwidth. It's okay to say no. It's okay to step back. It's okay to take care of yourself without apologizing. Sometimes you have to slow down to speed up. And sometimes you have to pause to make the right decision, to make the ethical decision, to make the difficult decision. So practicing and protecting your energy, this isn't about being selfish. Think of this more as stewardship. Okay. Sometimes protecting your energy might even look like rest, or it could be stepping away from a conversation that you know isn't going anywhere. The fourth step is acting with intention. That's why we're doing all of this, because as resilient leaders, we don't want to react, we want to respond. So even in the fog, even under pressure, you can stay anchored to what matters. For me, it was keeping that April 15th finish line in mind when things got hard. So this doesn't mean always knowing the perfect answer, right? It just means that we're trying to quiet that noise. So we're leading from clarity and not leading to chaos that I was talking about earlier. Empathy. I want to talk about empathy because it is one of the most visible ways resilience can show up in a relationship. When we are depleted, distracted, emotionally overloaded, we can't truly be present with other people. We might hear them, but we're not listening. We might respond, I'm answering you, but I'm not connecting. So it takes inner capacity to hold space for someone else, especially when emotions are high, when we're under pressure, when there's a looming big decision coming. That capacity comes from resilience. The ability to stay grounded in ourselves makes it possible to stay open for others. When we can manage our own reactions, we're more able to respond with care instead of defensiveness, with curiosity instead of judgment. Empathy isn't about being emotional. It's about being steady. It's the choice to stay engaged rather than shut down. And that's the heart of relational trust. People don't just trust us because we're saying the right things, we're making all the rightest decisions, right? They trust us when they feel we're present, available, and we're not performative as leaders. We're living it. You know, that being on stage that I was talking about, they're watching our cues and trusting our leadership, even if they don't know where we're going. So while you see here on the slide a list of different things we can do to practice empathy, it all starts with having the capacity to show up for others, our bandwidth. So this is a visual I created. I called it the trust balance point. And I have it here because I started to think of like a ball, right? And it's almost like the 8-ball. Do you remember that? Anyway, so think of this like a ball. And what I was trying to visualize here is something that we feel, but we don't always put a name to it. Why trust in some cases holds steady, and in other situations it can start to unravel. So as leaders, what we're doing is we're balancing three forces. The first one is what's authentic to us. The next one is what are others expecting from us? And then the third one is what is the organization expecting from our role? So when those are in alignment, trust is strong. You know, the balance is maintained. People experience us as grounded. They think we are consistent and real. We show up in ways that feel steady to others. Now, the pressure hits, tight deadlines, difficult conversations, and unexpected change. And so then holding that balance starts to get harder, right? One factor shifts a little bit and it starts to tilt and we fall out of balance. And then what do? We might try to overcompensate. We try to be what we think that other people think we should be. Yeah, I twisted that around on purpose because can sometimes be what's happening in our brains. Or maybe we do what feels safe. We're saying we're just being true to ourselves when really we're avoiding something or tuning out. Or what about what I said about our profession? We can be very rational, very analytical. So when things start to tilt, we just think, what is the deadline? Let's tick those things off the checklist. Let's meet those objectives. And we stop really thinking about the people. So this is where resilience goes from being that lovely buzzword to actual real leadership performance, how we show up in reality. So what this ball does by understanding these three things, hopefully what it can do is help us raise awareness to notice when we're starting to drift, if you will, out of alignment and losing our internal capacity to reset. When we don't do that, we are going to drift further. And depending on the behaviors that we're exhibiting, other people start to notice us. They notice that drift. And over time, trust can start to crack, and those cracks can start to widen. Because I said this before, trust in leadership, this is the glue that holds organizations together. Without it, productivity crashes, culture suffers, and people leave. People don't need you to be perfect. They need us to be real, consistent, and emotionally available even under pressure. So yes, as a leader, you're going to feel pressure, compressed, right? You don't have the luxury of sitting on the sidelines. You have to keep it together. But what you don't have to be is perfect. You have to be steady so that you can lead through those moments without losing the trust of the team in the process. Now, earlier I used the word triggers, and it's one of the different things for us to think about when we're talking about core identity. Now, I've used this slide before in other sessions about self-awareness and things like that, which is important because self-awareness starts by understanding your core identity. But reflecting on all of these is also part of resilience because it gives you something that you can come back to time and again to strengthen that. So values, for example, they act as an internal compass. When you are in a stressful or uncertain situation, your values help filter out the noise. They can help ground you in what matters most. So even if you don't have a complete clarity, there's a little bit of fog, right? You're not making decisions in the fog. You're making decisions from a place of integrity. Triggers, okay, those are the moments, the words, the situations. They spark a strong emotional response. And when you're under stress, those triggers can become a little more sensitive and the responses can become louder. And so what a trigger might do is knock you off course if you don't recognize them, if you're caught by surprise. But if you really reflect on what those might be for you, you might be able to catch something because they start to serve, if you will, as an early warning system before that drift starts to happen. Strengths are those abilities and those instincts that you will naturally lean on. They're the things that come naturally and that you do well. And in moments of pressure, those strengths can steady you. They can remind you of what you're capable of. If you're not aware, you might overuse them because you're just leaning into what you can do automatically. And that's part of the checking out process. So each of these values, triggers, and strengths, they don't just help you know yourself better. They become a touchstone for you if that ground, that shift starts to happen, so that you can hold on to and maintain your composure, AKA strengthen resilience. So I want to do a quick pause and come over here. So I don't see any questions coming in. So fantastic, I think. I think that's fantastic. Okay. Well, so how do you do this stuff? I talked about those 4 steps. What does this look like in practice? Because up until now, all I've shared are great ideas, if I do say so myself. No, but seriously, okay. These are all intellectual ideas. How do we translate them into actionable behaviors and habits that help us strengthen resilience without having to put in a whole lot of effort, if you will? This is my REM 360 framework. It offers a framework. I just used the same sentence twice in a word. I just used the same word twice in a sentence. But that's okay. You get it. So this offers a process for doing the little things that can help strengthen our resilience muscle moment by moment, day to day. And it's a 3-step cycle. So it's noticing discomfort. Even though you're uncomfortable, it's navigating through the moments so that you can get your work done. And then resetting. Now, that's the part that can take more effort, surprisingly, than other things, because we're not so good. Remember, I said it's self-compassion. We're not so good at stepping back and pausing. I feel like the idea that you have to pause so that you can move forward, for many, it feels like that pause is too risky, that I just don't have time to pause because I've got to keep moving. And sometimes that's exactly why we need to pause. Change happens in micro moments. Yes, sometimes change is big, but most of the time it's small, as in teeny weeny small change. I often talk about change, especially internal change, growth, and development, in terms of 1 degree. If you're in Los Angeles and you chart a course on a boat to Hawaii and you are off by 1 degree, you will not make it to your destination. So 1 degree sounds like almost nothing, but over time, slow progression, ongoing work, like slow boat ride, right? Over time, 1 degree will make a noticeable difference. So the definitions then, let me go back. So you see real-time awareness leads to emotional anchoring, leads us to mindful recovery, which can lead us back to real-time awareness. This is a cycle, and that's what I was talking about. This is something we can put into practice moment by moment, day to day. And it starts with developing awareness that we are being reactive. It could be an internal reaction. It could be a physical reaction. We are reacting to something that's happening. So we have to notice that that reaction is happening so that we have a chance at being deliberate, at being thoughtful, at being intentional. If we don't notice we're reacting to something, then how do we change those reactions? If we don't notice that something is starting to cause that stretch or start to create that sensation of being compressed, we will just react to it and we won't respond to it. So this is sometimes the hardest part. And if you pause, the question is like, well, when do I have to practice this? You could do it right now. Okay, don't do it right now because we're in training. We're in this session. But you can just pick a time and you can pause and ask yourself, reflect on what's happening, in that moment. 4 steps. The first step is, this is what I call the real-time awareness scan, if you will. So what am I thinking about? Like, what am I actually thinking about? What am I feeling? Can I name the emotions? You'd be surprised how difficult it can be to name emotion. And that's because the part of our brain responsible for language is not the part of our brain responsible for emotion. And so formulating the words to go with the emotion, it's surprisingly difficult. And then, well, how is all of that affecting me physically? And then all of that, how is that affecting the way I'm behaving? Which includes the decisions I'm making and the words coming out of my mouth, right? All of this. You can stop randomly at any moment of the day and reflect. What you might start to notice then is that you were, in fact, having a reaction earlier. And you might start to understand what it is you were reacting to. Yeah, I noticed it after the fact, but practice, practice, I might start to notice that's happening in real time. And instead of being reactive, now that I've put in some effort to practice this scan on a regular basis and I've noticed I've reacted this thing, I might notice it. And then the time of noticing it to the time of it happening becomes the same moment. And that is the moment. That is the 1 degree moment when I can start to make a little shift. So it starts from real-time awareness. What is emotional anchoring? Emotional anchoring is the ability to stay composed so that you can create some stability in those distressing situations so that you can continue to engage in ways that are open, calm, constructive, respectful. All of those things I was talking about that we need to be able to do and build the skills and the strengthen the skills, not build. I did split the hairs on that word, right? Strengthen our capacity so that even through turbulence, we can continue to provide the type of leadership and guidance and show up in the way that our teams need. Now, I talked about splitting hairs in terms of words earlier. I've used this word grounded a lot, and I want to make sure it's defined. So centered and grounded are terms that sometimes people use interchangeably. And that's fine. I think all I wanted to do is create some clarity, because for me, when I think about centered, I'm talking about, think about that core identity slide. Centered is really about understanding those principles, my values, what my triggers are, etc. And then coming back to those. Remember, I said you can use that as a way to, as a touchstone, if you will. Being grounded, on the other hand, to me, is about connecting to where I am in this moment. For example, in this webinar right now, if you're just thinking about, oh, wait, I'm a little bit distracted, how do you get back into the present and shake off all those things that are happening? And it could be so simple as, I'm actually doing it now, put your feet on the floor, press your feet into the floor, and pay attention to that sensation. It sounds strange, but you'd be surprised how effective this is. Look around your space and find something and look at that. Okay, what did I just pick up? My little hairy pen from Bill. My hairy pen. It did not sound good. And in doing that, it snaps me out of wherever I was and brings me back to the moment. And this is important because real-time awareness, it's what gets me into the moment. And now that I'm here, it's paying attention to what's happening. And all of this to create that space for me to be intentional. And intent, intention, intentionality, important to understand, because intent is my why. What is my motivation for doing something? I want to be healthy. What is the intention? I'm going to start lifting weights so that I can build my muscle. What's my intentionality? I'm going to hire a trainer. I'm going to get up at some ridiculous hour early in the morning and go to the gym and then do it. So it's important to differentiate those. Being rooted in intention means grounding your actions in a purpose, in your values that you can stand behind. It's not always easy, actually, to identify your true intention, especially in the heat of the moment when we're feeling stressed or overwhelmed. That kind of goes out the door and we start reacting from a place of fear or ego, avoidance. So again, a list of reflection questions to think about. And then the last one is mindful recovery. So you notice that you're being triggered or activated. You're having a reaction and not the one you were hoping to have. You have found a way to stay centered and grounded in this moment so that you can continue through. But the moment is past. You're back in your office. That difficult meeting has over. That uncomfortable conversation has ended. I'm doing this. You remember the phone? You all remember that? We talked on the phone. You hang up the phone and you breathe. You do something so that you can recharge that energy to maintain some compassion, to maintain some grace and stability. This is extending grace and self-compassion to yourself. So what does that look like? Well, it's a form of mindfulness practice, and there's no right or wrong practice here. It's just finding something that can create that space for you, that calming energy. So it could be simply breathing and taking a moment just to you'd be surprised how powerful it is to do that 5 times. Just a deep breath, hold it, and then exhale very slowly, like breathe in to a count of 4, hold it. You don't have to count that part, just hold it for a minute. And not a minute, hold it briefly, brief hold. And then exhale slowly, maybe to a count of 4 to 7 to 8, but very slowly to the point that you're sort of emptying out your lungs of air. And if you do that 5 times, it actually can start to calm your nervous system and bring you back to that sense of balance. Sometimes that's all you have is time for 5 breaths. Sometimes you have time for a walk or a brief meditation. Whatever it is for you, I'm encouraging you to find that. So as I wrap up, I want to remind us all that this isn't about being emotional. You know, we hear all the time, don't be emotional when you're making a decision. Emotions are not the problem. It's unacknowledged and misdirected emotions that can cloud our judgment. Emotional dysregulation, if you will. So it's not being able to identify, recognize, and understand emotions in ourselves and in others so that we can manage how we're showing up and the situation effectively. It's reading the room and reading ourselves. I mentioned the word fog. I've used that word a couple of times, and I did that because fog can sometimes evoke a feeling, if you will. I wanted to create a visual of it because it can be disoriented, especially when the fog is very thick. It makes it hard to see what's coming on this long road trip. And most of us, especially in leadership, we don't like that. We are not comfortable with surprise. We like clarity, control. But this isn't about avoiding surprises. It's learning how to move through this. So this is moving through the next few feet, That road trip, you're driving through fog. What happens? You don't speed up. You slow down. You stay alert. You keep your eyes on the road and you're moving forward just a few feet at a time. And that's what fog represents here. Discomfort, stress, anxiety, boredom, irritation, you name it. Resilience will allow us to continue driving through this fog because we know the destination and we can trust our process that we'll get there. It might be a little harder than we expected, but that's the muscle we're working on, moving forward despite the discomfort. So what does this look like? Well, what resilience then does is it helps create this space for us to create clarity, reconnect with our intention. When it comes to making effective decisions, there are 4 stages we go through. And the first stage is framing that decision. And so clarifying objectives, avoiding irrational escalation, all of this can happen when we're quieting our minds and finding that space, that capacity. It's also gathering information that once we know the decisions that we need to be made, we're pulling all the data in. And this allows us to do this objectively with greater tolerance for that uncertainty. And then in terms of creating that space for consideration, the other stages of making a decision, it's actually coming to the conclusion. So using your judgment, making a decision, it can help us make a decision even if it feels like our values and priorities, in order a way that is reinforced by our values and priorities. I should have said it that way. And then learning from the cycle, learning from feedback. And so all of those things are the things that make resilience, that's why resilience is so important and what it allows us to do and supports us from a decision-making perspective as leaders. All right, I'm popping over to the Q&A.
Jeanna, this is Beryl. Did you see I popped some things over in priority for you?
I did. Thank you.
Excellent. All right.
And let me go to the first one. How can we foster change, new ideas, etc., among closed-minded peers and supervisors that are resistant to change? So one of the things that can be hard is by saying change, because as soon as you say the word change, people tend to double down. That fear, that anxiety that I was talking about earlier, and that's natural. So one of the things to think about doing is coming to them with curiosity. Let me better understand what you're thinking about, because sometimes when we are trying to push an idea on someone else, we're not necessarily listening to their concerns, their anxieties, their questions. We're not listening to understand, we're listening to respond. So one thing we can do is to sit down and have a conversation and ask them to help you better understand their thinking and bring them into the decision making. Oftentimes we'll find that we're both operating from the same view of what's important, and we're just talking about it and approaching it different ways. Come to find out that my idea of the process might not be the best process. It's amazing what I can learn when I'm opening up and inviting them to do the same. How does one identify help? How does one identify help in being resilient? Well, sometimes it's asking for feedback. Sometimes it's asking for help. Do you have a coach? Do you have a mentor that you can go to? Do you have a friend who can help signal to you that you're starting to show ... So it's not an accountability partner, but having somebody who you can go to as that touchstone to give you that external feedback because you're struggling to do it internally. How can meditation connect or interact with resilience? So part of what happens when we find ourselves under stress, when we especially are facing a high stakes decision that we have to make, we tend to tighten up. And sometimes we tend to start to hyper focus on just one thing. And that one thing is either the thing we're most afraid of, the thing that's the biggest risk, the thing that makes us most uncomfortable. What meditation can do, or any form of mindfulness practice, is it can quiet our minds. It can bring back literally our blood pressure. It can lower our blood pressure and reduce cortisol and all of those things that are in our bodies that are slowing down our ability to think clearly. So meditation does, there's a lot of study. There are a lot of studies that show the power of meditation on being able to make clear decisions. And so I would encourage you to do some reading on meditation, because I'm not a meditation expert, if you will, but I know it works. And then the last question, when meditating / mindful breathing in particular, where should your mind be? On the breathing? Is it okay to veer into other thoughts? Okay, Bill, I am not a meditator coach, if you will. I use an app. I was going to hold it like you would know. Insight Timer, but there's a app called Headspace. There's an app called Calm. There are a lot of apps you can use that can help you learn how to meditate, because the whole idea of mindfulness is to just notice what's happening in the moment. Your mind is going to drift. You notice the drift and you come back to noticing what's happening in the moment. And sometimes, a lot of times, it's just focusing on your breathing. Notice your breathing. So last question, how can we help lead those who are leading? How can we help lead those when our leaders are providing clear understanding and resilience to us? I don't think I'm understanding that question. I apologize, Erin. I can't really answer.
I wonder if it's a typo and it's supposed to be aren't instead of are.
Yeah. How can we lead those when our leaders are not providing clear? So leadership is sometimes title, leadership is sometimes role, and sometimes leadership is influence. And so if we are struggling because we don't feel that we're getting the clarity from our leaders, that they don't seem to be resilient, the best we can do is show up for others the way we are hoping our leaders show up for us, from whatever level we are. Because all we can ever do is control what is around us. And I can't control other people. I can provide security, offer resources, and set a role as an example for others to follow. All right, I wish I had more time, but I see now I got like 2 minutes, so I'm going to do a quick wrap up. And two things, I want to invite you next week. I'm actually going to be doing a program with Bill. It looks at that REM 360 framework, but at the organizational level. So I hope you can join us for that. And then later this month, our next installment of the Ascend Leadership Monthly webinar series is April 25th. We're talking about making decisions with confidence. Registration for both of those webinars is open. That Ascend Leadership Monthly is the last Friday of every month. In May, we're talking about difficult conversations. In June, mindful leadership practices. And you can view the entire schedule on my website. Fourth Friday of the month, 3 to 4 Eastern. So, and with that, I will just like to thank you all for joining me today. And if you're interested in learning more about other programs that I offer, scan the QR code and get some time on my calendar. Thank you for being here, and I hope to see you next time.